The business-class cabin of Pinnacle Airways Flight 614 was gleaming. At 39,000 feet, it was a carefully designed sanctuary of privilege, far removed from the concerns of ordinary passengers. Each seat offered a silent promise of privacy and the sense that those seated here were more important than those behind the curtain. Marcus Kane was seated in seat 2A, by the window in the second row. He was dressed very simply, to an ordinary observer or a prejudiced one. He looked not like the founder of Kane Capital Group, but like someone who had accidentally been upgraded. He certainly didn't look like someone who owned 42% of the airline. This anonymity was deliberate. Marcus had built his fortune by recognizing inefficiencies in systems that others inevitably accepted through pattern recognition. The anonymous corporate audit program extended this philosophy to the companies Kane Capital invested in. He flew their routes unannounced, experiencing their actual services rather than the choreographed perfection offered to known VIPs. He had no idea what would happen to him on this flight. Today's flight was Pinnacle Airways' third audit in 6 months. The first two had revealed disturbing patterns, subtle but consistent biases in the crew's treatment of passengers based on their appearance rather than their actual status or, more importantly, their basic dignity. He pulled a worn book from his backpack. Every few years he reread it to remember where he came from and why his work mattered. A book chronicling the history of the civil rights movement. His mother had given him this book before she died. Her handwritten notes were still visible in the margins. "Respect is not negotiable," she had written on page 47. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise," it said. Marcus was about to test whether Pinnacle Airways felt the same way. At 9:42, as the last passengers boarded the plane, Marcus noticed a change in the cabin crew's attitude. Chief Flight Attendant Stephen Mitchell moved through business class with practiced efficiency, greeting passengers with a warmth that seemed calibrated to visible signs of wealth. "Mr. Harrison, it's so good to see you again. Mineral water as usual?" he asked. "Miss Chen, I've set aside your favorite amenity kit. Senator Blake, welcome aboard our flight. We are honored to have you with us." In fact, each passenger was being treated differently. Every interaction was seamless, professional, and clearly differentiated according to the perceived importance of the passengers. When it came to Stephen Marcus's turn, the stares intensified. Without bothering with greetings, Stephen said, "Boarding pass." Marcus looked up from his book, noticed the change but kept his expression neutral. "Good morning, seat 2A, he replied. Without comment, he produced his boarding pass and watched Stephen's face as the attendant examined the card with unnecessary meticulousness. "This indicates business class," Stephen remarked. Marcus was fully aware of everything. "Yes, that's correct," he replied calmly. Stephen's eyes deliberately scanned Marcus's casual attire and paused with barely concealed displeasure. "I'll have to verify that at the gate," he replied. Marcus put down his book, his patience already wearing thin. "The boarding pass is valid. I checked in online this morning," he replied. "Still," said Stephen, "I need to verify it. Please wait here." The other passengers around them glanced at them briefly before returning to their devices and magazines. A woman in 1B whispered something to her friend. A businessman in 3A watched them with undisguised curiosity. Stephen retreated to the kitchen with his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in a low voice while occasionally glancing at Marcus. 5 to 10 minutes passed. Marcus remained in his seat, appearing calm on the outside, but his mind had recorded every detail. Different treatment, unnecessary verification, the assumption that his presence required explanation. He had lived with this his entire life. As a scholarship student at MIT, professors assumed he was there for sports rather than his nearly perfect GPA. Stephen returned, his expression slightly less certain, but still hostile. "The gate confirms your reservation. However, I must inform you that this section is reserved for premium business travelers," he said. Marcus tilted his head slightly, wondering where this was going. "I am a business traveler. That's why I bought a business class ticket," he replied. Stephen asked, "Perhaps you would be more comfortable in one of our excellent seats at the back of the cabin?" What do you think this question meant? The question hung in the air. "I'm comfortable where I am," Marcus said quietly. "This is my assigned seat," he added. Stephen's professional smile hardened. "Sir, I'm trying to accommodate everyone here. We have protocols," he lied. "Show me the protocol," Marcus interrupted politely, "that allows you, based on your subjective assessment, to move a passenger from a seat that has been approved and paid for to another seat." The cabin fell silent. The nearby passengers were no longer acting indifferent. Stephen's face flushed. "Sir, I don't like the tone of your voice. If you continue to cause trouble, I will have no choice but to call security." He played the security card. Marcus asked, "Trouble? I'm just sitting in my assigned seat. How is that trouble? Difficulty?" Marcus repeated, his voice still calm but now sharp. "I'm sitting in my assigned seat. How could that be difficult?" Before Stephen could respond, a commotion at the aircraft entrance caught everyone's attention. 54-year-old Derek Pemberton entered business class as if he were royalty entering a palace. The price of his custom-tailored charcoal suit was probably more than most passengers' monthly salaries. Derek called out, "Stephen, what's the reason for the delay?" "As usual, I specifically requested seat 2A, he asked. Stephen's expression immediately changed, becoming warm. "Mr. Pemberton, welcome aboard. I apologize for the confusion. We're just trying to resolve a seat issue," he replied. Derek's gaze fell on Marcus for the first time. "I understand," Derek said. "Well, this won't take long. That's my seat. I've been sitting there every Tuesday for the past 4 years," he said. Marcus looked at him with interest. "Congratulations on your consistency. However, that seat is reserved for me today," he replied. Marcus seemed to sense what was about to happen. Derek blinked, genuinely surprised by this rejection. Derek replied in a condescending tone, "Young man, I don't think you understand how this works. I'm a Diamond Elite member. I have over 6 million miles with Pinnacle. This seat is registered as a permanent preference in my profile." "That's impressive," Marcus said sincerely. "However, preference is not the same as ownership. I have a confirmed reservation for seat 2A. You can choose any of the other empty business class seats." Derek's face darkened. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. "No," Marcus replied honestly. "Should I?" This question seemed to hurt Derek more than outright insult. His entire identity was built on being recognized, being important, being someone significant. He seemed shocked. "I'm Derek Pemberton, CEO of Pemberton Industries. I spend over $400,000 a year with this airline. I know CEO Robert Harris personally, and I guarantee you when he hears about this, you'll wish you were more cooperative," he went further. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "That's quite an important connection. You should definitely call him. In fact, I recommend you do," he said. Stephen, sensing a situation he couldn't control was escalating, pressed his radio. "Cabin manager, business class, please," he called. Elena Rodriguez appeared a few seconds later, professionalism evident in her every move. She quickly assessed the situation. Derek Pemberton, visibly angry, Marcus Kane sitting calmly in the disputed area, Stephen pacing anxiously, and the cabin filled with passengers watching the drama unfold. Elena began with a less than happy smile. "Gentlemen," she said, "how can I help resolve this situation?" Derek, not letting Marcus speak, cut in. "It's very simple. This passenger is sitting in my seat. I have a standing reservation for seat 2A on Tuesday morning flights. This is clearly a reservation error that needs to be corrected," he said, trying to take the high ground. Elena turned to Marcus. "Sir, I apologize for the confusion. May I see your boarding pass?" she asked. Marcus handed over the card without comment. Elena examined it carefully, then looked at her tablet. The expression on her face changed slightly. First surprise, then confusion, then something close to concern. "The system shows that seat 2A was assigned to you during online check-in this morning," she confirmed. "It's a valid reservation." "Exactly," Marcus continued. "So there's no problem." Elena turned to Derek and continued. "However, Mr. Pemberton is one of our most valued customers with a documented seat preference. Perhaps we can find a suitable alternative for everyone," he said. "I won't change my seat," Marcus said simply. "Why are you being so unreasonable?" Derek asked. "I'm offering you the chance to be accommodating here. There are many other excellent seats in business class," he said, trying to resolve the issue. "Then you'll have no trouble choosing one," Marcus replied. Stephen leaned toward Elena and whispered urgently, but Marcus caught some of the words. "Doesn't seem to belong here. Probably an upgrade. Causing trouble." Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest. It wasn't fear, but the weight of countless similar moments he had experienced throughout his life. He thought of his mother, who had passed away 20 years ago, and the story she had told him about being removed from her first-class seat on the way to her own mother's funeral. "Not this time," she had told him years later, her eyes tearful. "Never let them make you feel like you don't belong where you have every right to be." Marcus remained in his seat. When Derek realized his usual tactics weren't working, he took out his phone. "Fine, I'll call Robert Harris directly. He'll solve this problem in seconds," he said. "Please do," Marcus encouraged. "I'm really curious to hear his response," he added. As Derek walked away to make the call, Elena turned to Marcus and let her professional mask slip a little. "Sir, I'm trying to handle this diplomatically. Mr. Pemberton is influential. If you just," she continued. "If I just do what?" Marcus asked. "Can I accept being removed from my paid seat because someone else thinks they deserve it? Can I accept that some passengers' preferences are more important than other passengers' confirmed reservations?" he asked again. Elena shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "That's not what I'm suggesting." "Is that so?" "Because that's exactly what's happening here," he replied. Before she could respond, Derek returned with a triumphant look on his face. "Robert's assistant is looking into it," he announced. "In the meantime, I suggest you take a seat somewhere else," he finished. Marcus didn't even stir. The mutual waiting continued, the other passengers whispering among themselves. A few had taken out their phones, secretly recording. Stephen pressed his radio again. Airport security needed at gate B-17. There's a passenger not complying with crew instructions, he called out. Marcus took out his own phone and sent an encrypted message to his CEO. Audit protocol initiated. Flight 614. Document everything. 3 time zones away, at the Kane Capital Group headquarters in New York. This message prompted immediate action. A special team began monitoring social media, tracking the flight status, and preparing legal documents. But on Flight 614, Marcus just sat and waited in business class, seat 2A. Airport security arrived 6 minutes later. 2 officers entered the business class cabin. Marcus watched them approach with the same calm patience he had maintained throughout the conflict. "We received a report that a passenger is refusing to comply with the crew's instructions," they said. Stephen quickly stepped forward. "Yes, this passenger is refusing to vacate the seat requested by one of our Diamond Elite members," he replied. Officer Williams turned to Marcus. "Sir, is that correct?" he asked. "Partially," Marcus replied. "I refused to vacate the seat assigned to me. I paid for this seat and it was confirmed through the airline's own reservation system. I am not refusing the crew's legitimate instructions," he answered clearly. Williams looked at Elena. "Was this seat assigned to him?" he asked. Elena, caught between company policy and reality, hesitated. "Technically, yes. However, we have special protocols for our frequent flyers," she replied. Marcus gently interrupted. "Those protocols cannot override confirmed reservations. I've reviewed Pinnacle's carriage contract. Crew members can reassign seats for security or operational reasons. In this case, neither applies," he replied. Officer Williams took out his tablet and made it clear he was preparing to check the relevant regulations. Derek Pemberton stepped forward, growing impatient with the delay. "Officer, I don't think you understand the situation. I'm Derek Pemberton, CEO of Pemberton Industries. I fly this route every week. I always sit in seat 2A. It says so in my customer profile. This person is clearly taking advantage of a booking error," he said. Williams looked at Derek with the patient expression of someone who had dealt with claimants before. "Sir, with all due respect, customer preferences do not create a legal obligation for other passengers to surrender their assigned seats." Derek's face flushed. "Do you know how much revenue I bring to this airline?" he asked. "That's between you and the airline," Williams replied. "From a security standpoint, if this passenger has a valid boarding pass for this seat and hasn't violated any rules, I can't force him to move." Stephen's professional composure deteriorated further. "He's disrupting the boarding process. We're already 15 minutes late because of this." "The delay," Marcus said quietly, "seems to stem not from my being in my assigned seat, but from my insistence on changing seats." A passenger in seat 3B, a woman in her 30s with a serious expression, spoke up. "I watched the whole thing. The gentleman in the hoodie was extremely polite. It was the crew who escalated the situation." "Actually," said the woman in 3B, now clearly recording with her phone, "this concerns all of us. Because if they can remove him from the seat he paid for because someone else wanted it, they can do this to any of us." Officer Williams made a decision. "Sir," he addressed Marcus, "you are not violating any rules. You have the right to remain in your assigned seat." He turned to the crew. "Unless you can provide a legitimate operational reason for reassignment, this passenger will remain in his seat," he said. Elena's radio crackled. "Cabin manager, this is the captain. What's our status?" "We need to take off," she asked. He walked away to respond, his voice low but tense. Stephen froze, his authority shaken, his assumptions challenged. Derek made one last attempt. "I will file a formal complaint about this incident. Your behavior is unacceptable. You could have changed seats and prevented all this confusion," he replied. Marcus calmly met his gaze. "Mr. Pemberton, I think we have very different definitions of acceptable behavior. I am sitting in the seat I paid for. You want me to give you my seat because you think you are entitled to it. I will leave it to others to judge which side is more reasonable." Derek opened his mouth to respond, but Elena returned and interrupted him, speaking with an even more tense expression than before. "Mr. Pemberton," she said carefully, "the captain asked me to offer you seat 1A, our premium seat with extra legroom, along with complimentary drinks and a travel voucher for future flights." Derek looked stunned. The offer was generous in every way, but it meant a loss. "This is unacceptable," he muttered. He grabbed his bag and walked toward seat 1A. Officer Williams nodded to Marcus. "Enjoy your flight, sir," he said. As the security officers left, the cabin atmosphere changed, but Stephen wasn't done yet. After the emergency had passed, he approached Marcus, his voice low and tense, barely controlling his anger. "I hope you're satisfied with the commotion you caused," he said. Marcus looked up from the book he had reopened during the commotion. "Mitchell," he read the name tag carefully. "I didn't cause any commotion. I sat in the seat assigned to me and politely refused to change places. Everything that happened after that was someone else's choice. You could have been cooperative," Stephen insisted. "I was cooperative," Marcus replied. "I cooperated with the crew by following all legitimate instructions, remaining calm during an unnecessary confrontation, and not immediately filing a discrimination complaint." Actually, what angers you is that I didn't cooperate by being seen as valuable as the other passengers." Before Stephen could respond, a new problem arose. Sofia Torres, the young flight attendant who had been silently observing the entire situation, approached them with her tablet. "Stephen," she said hesitantly, "I was checking the passenger list, and I think you should take a look at something." Stephen nervously waved her away. "Not now, Sophia," he said. "It's important," she insisted, lowering her voice but not enough to prevent Marcus from hearing. "The passenger in seat 2A is registered in the system as—" "Not now," Stephen shouted, cutting her off again. Sophia backed away, but not before giving Marcus an apologetic look. Marcus nodded slightly in thanks. Whether Stephen ignored her because he was proud or prejudiced, Sophia had tried to prevent what was about to happen. The last passengers boarded the plane, and when the cabin doors closed, Marcus turned his attention to the window. That's when he noticed it. Near the left wing, just below the leading edge, a thin amber-colored liquid reflected the light. Marcus looked closer, his aeronautical engineering background immediately recognizing the significance of this observation. He pressed the call button. Stephen answered with obvious reluctance. "Yes?" Marcus calmly pointed and said, "It looks like there's a fluid leak in the left wing area, near the hydraulic access panel." Stephen barely looked out the window. "That's just condensation, sir. Completely normal," came the reply. "I don't think so," Marcus replied. "I have an aeronautical engineering background. This isn't the consistency or color of condensation. It looks like a hydraulic leak, which is a serious safety issue." Stephen's expression hardened, clearly interpreting this as retaliation for the seat argument. "Sir, I understand your concern, but our ground crew has already completed the pre-flight checks." "Everything is fine," he replied. "I still want this recorded," Marcus insisted. "If this is hydraulic fluid and no action is taken, a critical situation could arise during the flight." "I'll make a note of it," Stephen said, indifferently, already turning away. "Thank you for your attention." Marcus watched him walk away without recording anything. He took out his phone and snapped a few photos of the fluid trail, noted the timestamp, and sent a brief message to his team. "Hydraulic leak reported to crew, assessed as condensation, logged for safety file." As the plane moved away from the gate, Marcus kept his eyes on that amber-colored trail. It had grown slightly in the 15 minutes since he first noticed it, an unsettling sign that confirmed his initial assessment. The Boeing 7087 began taxiing toward the runway, and Marcus settled into his seat and opened his book, though his attention was divided between the page and the wing outside the window. Derek Pemberton sat stiffly in seat 1A, his previous triumph now turned to anger. Scrolling through his phone, he had already started composing a harsh email to Robert Harris about the unacceptable treatment he had received. In the galley, Stephen was talking to Elena about writing a report on the difficult passenger in 2A, neither of them realizing they were documenting their own professional downfall. In the cockpit, Captain James Rivera and First Officer Sarah Chen were reviewing their pre-flight checklists, unaware that a critical safety issue had been reported and dismissed, not because of its substance, but because of who reported it. The 787's engines started up, their familiar hum rising to take-off thrust. Marcus closed his book and gripped the armrests tightly, not because he was afraid of flying, he had logged thousands of hours in much simpler aircraft, but because he knew that despite doing everything in his power to prevent a potential disaster, he had been ignored. 14 minutes later, the consequences of that decision would reach proportions no one could have imagined. As Flight 61R accelerated down the runway, the amber line on the left wing continued to widen, the hydraulic fluid being pulled back by the fast-moving air, leaving a trail that Marcus could clearly see from his window, but which everyone else focused on takeoff could not. The plane turned, its nose pointing skyward, its wheels lifted off the ground, and it climbed into the morning air above Chicago. Marcus's wallet was in the tablet case secured under the seat in front of him. Inside the wallet was a small leather card holder. Inside the card holder was a card that would change everything when it appeared, a platinum executive card identifying Marcus as a member of the board of directors of Pinnacle Airways' parent company and the company's largest individual shareholder. However, this truth would only emerge after the crisis Marcus was trying to prevent became impossible to ignore. At 10,000 feet, the hydraulic pressure warning light on the cockpit panel flashed for the first time. It wasn't the red emergency light, but the yellow warning light. Yet it was still significant enough to make Captain Chen frown. "Captain, there's pressure fluctuation in the left hydraulic system," he reported. Captain Rivera glanced at the gauge. "Probably a sensor glitch. Keep an eye on it." At 15,000 feet, the fluctuation became more pronounced. At 18,000 feet, the yellow warning turned orange. And at 20,000 feet, as Flight 614 leveled off to climb to its cruising altitude, the system Marcus was trying to warn them about began to malfunction seriously. The flight attendant rang the call bell, and Stephen nervously picked up the intercom. As Stephen hurried forward, Elena took over the cabin, her professional smile never faltering despite her growing unease. In seat 2A, Marcus watched the wing with bitter satisfaction, not because his prediction had come true, but because he had documented everything: the photos, the report he gave the crew, his concern being ignored. When the crisis came, and judging by the amber-colored liquid leaving a visible trail on the wing surface, the crisis was clearly coming. There would be no doubt about what had happened and who had ignored it. The Boeing 787 continued its climb, its passengers unaware they were flying in an aircraft developing a hydraulic failure that could have been prevented had one man's observations not been ignored, more for their appearance than their substance. 13 minutes later, that failure would force an emergency landing. 14 minutes later, Marcus Kane would reveal who he was, and afterwards Pinnacle Airways would discover that the passenger they were trying to remove from seat 2A had the power to ground their entire fleet. The transformation of the aviation industry was about to begin. At 24,000 feet, the yellow warning light on Captain Rivera's instrument panel turned red. "Left hydraulic system pressure is critical," announced First Officer Chen, a controlled urgency in his voice. "We're losing fluid rapidly." Rivera's hands moved the controls skillfully and efficiently. "Declare an emergency. Give me the return route to O'Hare, and tell the cabin to prepare for a possible rapid descent." In the business class cabin, a sudden chime and then Elena's voice over the intercom interrupted the casual chatter. "Ladies and gentlemen, the captain requests that everyone return to their seats and fasten their seatbelts immediately. Flight attendants, secure the cabin." Her carefully neutral but tense tone instantly created awareness among the experienced passengers. This was no ordinary turbulence. Something was wrong. Marcus felt the plane shift slightly, beginning a steeper descent than normal. Through his window, he could see the yellow trail of hydraulic fluid on the wing surface, illuminated by the morning sun. Stephen emerged from the cockpit, his face pale, and walked directly to Marcus's seat. For the first time since boarding the plane, there was no arrogance in his expression, only a barely controlled fear. "The captain wants to talk to you," Stephen said, the previous condescension gone from his voice. "About the leak you reported." Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt without a word and followed Stephen. As he approached the cockpit, he saw Derek Pemberton in seat 1A, his white fingers clenched tightly around the armrests, his earlier bravado replaced by genuine terror. The cockpit door opened, and Marcus stepped into the controlled chaos of the ongoing emergency. Warning lights flashed across multiple panels. The radio crackled with air traffic control coordination. Both pilots were intensely engaged with their instruments. "Sir," Captain Rivera said without looking up from the control panel, "you reported a hydraulic leak during boarding, correct?" "Yes. About 30 minutes ago, near the left wing hydraulic access panel, an amber-colored fluid resembling hydraulic oil. I estimated it to be a slow leak that would accelerate with system pressure." Rivera's jaw tightened. "Can you describe exactly what you saw and when you saw it?" Marcus pulled out his phone and showed the time-stamped photos. The first observation was at 9:52. The streak was about 6 inches long, amber in color, and its viscosity matched Skydrol hydraulic fluid. I reported this to the chief flight engineer, but he dismissed it as condensation without investigating. Chen looked at the photos, then at his captain. "This matches the current leak location exactly. If we had noticed this on the ground, we would have changed planes and prevented this whole situation." Rivera finished with a grim expression. Pressing his radio, he said, "O'Hare approach, Pinnacle 614. We have a passenger with an aeronautical engineering background who detected this leak before takeoff. The crew did not investigate it properly." This admission, public, recorded, accusatory, hung in the air. "Sir," Rivera turned to Marcus, "based on what you saw outside, how do you assess our current situation?" Marcus looked at the instrument panels and processed the data with the analytical skills that made him one of America's most successful investors. "You're losing pressure faster than the backup system can compensate. The current descent rate indicates you planned an emergency landing at O'Hare, which is correct. However, I now recommend dumping fuel. If this situation turns into a full hydraulic failure, you'll want minimum landing weight." Rivera and Chen looked at each other. The suggestion was logical, professional, and exactly what they were about to initiate. "Who are you?" Chen asked, his question more curious than confrontational. "Someone to be taken seriously 2 hours ago," Marcus replied simply. "May I return to my seat? I don't want to add to your workload in an emergency." Rivera nodded. "Thank you. And sir, I'm sorry your report wasn't handled properly. That mistake is on us." When Marcus returned to the cabin, he could sense the change in the atmosphere. Passengers who had witnessed the argument over his seat now looked at him with a new awareness. The man they had seen being harassed by the crew had been called to the cockpit in an emergency. Elena approached Marcus as he sat down in seat 2A. "Mr. Kane, not now," Marcus said quietly but firmly. "Let the crew focus on getting us safely to the ground." Elena stepped back, and Marcus turned his attention back to the wing. The hydraulic leak was now so severe that even untrained observers could see it, a steady stream of fluid torn off by the airflow, leaving a visible trail behind the plane. Across the aisle, a businessman leaned forward. "You knew, didn't you, before we even boarded the plane?" Marcus nodded. "I reported it, but it was ignored." The man's face darkened. "Because of the seat issue, they thought you were just causing trouble." "Assumptions," said Marcus, "can be deadly." The Boeing 787 descended quickly but smoothly. Captain Rivera's skill evident in how he handled the damaged aircraft. Emergency vehicles were already visible on the runway, their lights flashing in a controlled chaos. Stephen mechanically followed emergency procedures as he moved through the cabin, but his eyes kept turning to Marcus with an expression bordering on fear, realizing what he was denying and why was enveloping him like a shroud. "Cabin crew, prepare for an emergency landing," said Rivera, his voice calm but commanding over the intercom. "Assume crash positions on my command." Marcus placed his hands on the seat in front of him, his engineering background running through the worst-case scenarios. The 787 had backup systems, but a critical hydraulic failure could compromise the control surfaces. They were about to test how well Boeing's backup systems performed under real crisis conditions. The runway was visible through the window, emergency vehicles advancing parallel to the approach path. Marcus could see the foam trucks, ambulances, firefighting equipment, a full emergency response protocol. "Stand by, stand by, stand by, stand by," Rivera commanded. The impact was harder than a normal landing but controlled. The plane shook as it touched down. The thrust reversers roared. Marcus felt a slight sway as the failing hydraulic system struggled to keep the plane centered on the runway. Finally, silence prevailed. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your seats. Emergency crews will assist in evacuating the aircraft." The cabin stirred with tense conversations, relief, and a few tears. But Marcus sat quietly and watched from his window as the ground crew swarmed the aircraft, spraying foam onto the wing area where hydraulic fluid posed a potential fire hazard. Elena approached Marcus's seat, her professional composure completely shattered. "Mr. Kane, I must inform you that airport security and airline management will be requesting statements from everyone involved in the pre-flight incident." "I know," Marcus replied. "I will gladly provide a full explanation of what happened, including the many malfunctions that led to this emergency." Elena paled further. "Sir, I hope you understand that we were only trying to, regardless of confirmed reservations or basic fairness, you were trying to appease a high-status passenger by removing someone you perceived as a low-status passenger from the flight. And when that same passenger reported a critical safety issue, you ignored it because you had already decided his observations were worthless." Marcus stood up and gathered his things. These decisions didn't just create an inconvenient customer service incident. They nearly caused a catastrophe. If the hydraulic failure had turned into a disaster during the flight, everyone on this plane could have died. The passengers listening around them fell silent. The full meaning of Marcus's words echoed through the cabin. Derek Pemberton, emerging from seat 1A, looked shaken and somehow smaller. The emergency had stripped away his former arrogance, leaving a middle-aged man confronted with his own mortality. He approached Marcus hesitantly. For what happened earlier, I overstepped." After studying him for a moment, Marcus replied, "Mr. Pemberton, your behavior was a symptom, not the cause. The system that encouraged you to believe your preferences superseded the rights of other passengers is what needs to be changed." As the passengers began to exit the plane via the emergency slides, even though the plane was stable, protocol required it. Marcus reached into his bag and pulled out a small leather card holder he had deliberately hidden so it wouldn't be seen. Elena, who was supervising the evacuation, saw the platinum card pinned to Marcus's jacket. When she noticed not the card itself, but the name embossed on it, her eyes widened. "Marcus Kane, member of the board of directors, Pinnacle Airways Corporation." She froze, the last bit of color draining from her face. You're on the board." "I'm the largest individual shareholder," Marcus corrected quietly. "I own 42% of the shares. I've been conducting anonymous service inspections for the past 6 months. Today's flight was my 3rd inspection." Stephen, who was nearby, overheard this conversation. He stumbled backward and grabbed onto a seat. "Oh my God," he whispered. Marcus turned to him. "Mr. Mitchell, you didn't try to remove a passenger from their seat based on prejudiced assumptions. You tried to remove your employer. More importantly, you ignored a safety issue that could have killed everyone on this plane." He looked at Stephen and Elena. "Let me be perfectly clear. This is not about revenge or personal offense. This is about identifying fundamental deficiencies in Pinnacle's culture that lead to dangerous outcomes. What happened today will be documented, analyzed, and systematically addressed." When Marcus finally stepped off the plane, Pinnacle CEO Robert Harris was waiting on the tarmac. Tall, silver-haired, and visibly shaken, Robert approached with the urgency of a man whose company was in free fall. "Marcus," he began, dropping all formality, my God, I just heard what happened. Are you okay?" Marcus nodded. "I'm fine. Everyone's fine, thanks to skilled pilots and redundant safety systems. But Robert, we need to talk. Right away." "My car is here," said Robert, pointing to the waiting black sedan. "I cleared my entire day." As they walked down the runway, emergency crews continued their work around Flight 614. News helicopters were already circling overhead. The emergency landing of a major airline's aircraft was newsworthy, and the story was just beginning. Inside the sedan, Robert turned to Marcus with a look of deep concern. "Tell me everything, from the very beginning." Marcus recounted. The confrontation in the seat, the dismissal of his safety concerns, the hydraulic failure that proved his warning right. Everything was documented with timestamps, photographs, and dozens of witness statements. Robert listened with horror, the magnitude of what he was hearing reflected on his face. "We could have had a catastrophe," he said finally. "A complete catastrophe. All because," he couldn't finish the sentence. "All because the team made assumptions based on appearances, rather than listening to the substance," Marcus finished. "This isn't about individual team members, Robert. This is a systemic problem. Over 6 months I documented similar patterns on numerous flights, differentiated treatment based on perceived status, security concerns filtered not by their validity, but by the person reporting them." He pulled out his tablet and showed the data he had compiled. Incidents of passengers being questioned or relocated based on their appearance, maintenance concerns being ignored when reported by the wrong passengers, a clear, undeniable pattern of bias affecting both service and safety. Robert's hands trembled slightly as he examined the evidence. "What do you want, Marcus?" "I want Pinnacle to be the industry standard for equal treatment and security protocols," Marcus replied. "I want a complete cultural transformation starting now." He paused for a moment, then added an ultimatum that would reshape the aviation industry. "And while those audits are underway, we will rebuild our training, policy, and accountability structures from the ground up." Robert's eyes widened. "Ground the entire fleet? Marcus, that's 168 planes, just the operational cost. It's nothing compared to the cost of what nearly happened today," Marcus cut him off. "We lost a life because we overlooked a maintenance issue reported by passengers. That would have destroyed the company. Losing multiple lives would destroy the credibility of the entire industry." He leaned forward, his resolve clear. "Robert, this is not up for debate. Either we implement a voluntary and comprehensive transformation now, or the investigations launched by the FAA and NTSB after this incident will force changes beyond our control. I'd rather lead this transformation than have it imposed on us." Robert was silent for a long time, the weight of the decision evident on his face. Then he took out his phone. "This is Harris," he said when the call connected. "Emergency board meeting immediately. Virtual participation accepted. Janet?" he called out to his executive assistant. "Start preparing the fleet grounding order. It needs to be ready for board approval within 2 hours." While Robert made additional calls to the FAA, insurance companies, and operations teams, Marcus sent his own message to Kane Capital Group's crisis management team. "The implementation phase is beginning. Prepare to urgently implement the Kane Equality Protocol documents." The transformation had begun. At the terminal, news crews, hearing this was more than a simple emergency landing, had already begun their preparations. Passengers from Flight 614 were being interviewed, most recounting the pre-flight conflict and its connection to the ignored safety warning. Sofia Torres, the young flight attendant who had tried to warn Stephen about Marcus's identity, approached him as he entered the terminal. "Mr. Kane," she said tensely, "I just wanted to say, I tried to tell them. I saw your name, your board membership in the system, but they wouldn't listen to me." Marcus studied her thoughtfully. "Why did you try to warn them?" "Because it was wrong," she said simply. "Even before I knew who you were, it was wrong. My brother went through something similar last year. On another airline, the crew kicked him out of first class because they thought he looked suspicious. There was no reason other than his appearance." Marcus slowly shook his head. "What's your full name?" "Sofia Torres." "Sofia, I won't forget that name. When we start rebuilding Pinnacle's culture, we'll need people who recognize wrongdoing, even if it's normalized by those around them." Her eyes widened slightly. "Sir, be available," Marcus said. "You may get a call about a new position in the very near future." As Marcus walked through the terminal toward Robert's temporary command center, his phone began to vibrate with notifications. The news was spreading nationwide. Airline passenger warning ignored. Emergency landing made. CEO discovers safety issues that were visually overlooked. Pinnacle Airways faces safety investigation after near crash. But the most significant headline was still being written in boardrooms and regulatory agencies across the country. Major airline grounds entire fleet for cultural and safety overhaul. The transformation Marcus had foreseen wasn't just approaching, it had already happened. and nothing in the aviation industry would ever be the same again. Pinnacle Airways Corporation's emergency board meeting began 90 minutes after the emergency landing of Flight 614. 7 board members gathered in the conference room at the Chicago headquarters, while the other 4 joined via secure video link. The atmosphere was tense, the usual formalities for crisis intervention set aside. Robert Harris stood at the head of the table, his usual impeccable appearance disheveled after hours of damage control. Marcus Kane sat beside him, his blue hooded sweatshirt a sharp contrast to the suits surrounding them. "Ladies and gentlemen," Robert began, "we are facing the most serious crisis in Pinnacle's 40-year history. What happened on Flight 614 this morning exposed fundamental flaws in our operations that put every passenger at risk." He brought up a presentation on the main screen, documented evidence from Marcus's 6 months of anonymous audits. The data was damning. Dozens of incidents where passengers were questioned, moved or denied boarding based on their appearance rather than actual policy violations. Numerous security concerns filtered, delayed or ignored depending on who reported them. "This morning," Robert continued, his voice heavy, "one of our planes experienced a critical hydraulic failure that could have resulted in disaster. The leak was detected before takeoff by a passenger with expertise in aeronautical engineering. His report was dismissed as condensation without investigation." He paused for a moment, allowing them to process the meaning. That passenger was Marcus Kane, our largest shareholder and a board member, who conducts anonymous service inspections. The crew who dismissed him did not know his identity. They made their decision based solely on his appearance. Board member and former FAA Administrator Catherine Wells leaned forward. "What was the actual failure mode? How critical is the situation we're talking about?" Marcus spoke for the first time, his voice calm but authoritative. "Complete loss of the left hydraulic system at 24,000 feet. The leak I detected was a slow seal failure, accelerating under pressure. If it had gone undetected for another 15 minutes, we would have lost multiple control surfaces. Best case scenario, an extremely dangerous emergency landing. Worst case scenario, complete loss of control of the aircraft." The room fell silent, everyone feeling the magnitude of the narrowly averted disaster. "The NTSB has already launched an investigation," Robert added. "The FAA is specifically reviewing our safety reporting procedures. Media interest is also growing by the hour." Another board member, David Chen, spoke up. "How much legal risk are we exposed to here? If we don't act decisively, it will end in disaster," replied General Counsel Patricia Morrison. "We have documented evidence of patterns of discriminatory treatment and safety protocol violations. If this lawsuit is filed, and it will be, we will need to demonstrate that we have taken comprehensive corrective measures immediately." Marcus stood up and drew everyone's attention in the room. "I'm not concerned with the lawsuit. What I'm concerned with is transformation. Therefore, I propose grounding the entire fleet for comprehensive security audits and cultural revision." The reaction was immediate and fierce. Several board members spoke at once, their concerns focused on operational and financial impacts. "Ground the entire fleet?" David Chen repeated. "Marcus, that's 168 planes serving 63 destinations. Just the revenue loss, insignificant compared to the alternative." Marcus cut him off sharply. "This morning we nearly lost an aircraft because biases created a blind spot in safety. How many other critical issues were overlooked or delayed because they came from the wrong passenger? We don't know. We won't know without a thorough investigation." Catherine Wells slowly shook her head. "He's right. From a security standpoint, we have to assume this isn't an isolated incident. The NTSB will likely mandate something similar. It's better to be proactive." Robert pulled out the financial projections. "We estimate that keeping the fleet grounded for 2 weeks will cost approximately $180 million. This includes passenger compensation, rebooking costs, and operational disruptions." "What if we lose a plane carrying 280 passengers?" Marcus asked quietly. "What would the cost be? In terms of loss of life, legal liability, damage to brand reputation?" The question hung in the air, unanswerable and devastating. Marcus continued, shifting his tone from challenge to leadership. "I'm not just suggesting we inspect the planes. We should use this flight suspension to implement what I call the Kane Equality Protocol. This protocol involves comprehensively restructuring our methods of training crew, managing interactions with passengers, and addressing safety concerns." He opened his presentation, revealing months of preparation. The protocol was detailed and comprehensive. Mandatory bias awareness training with measurable outcomes, not corporate checklist exercises. Restructured security reporting that eliminates passenger status-based filtering. Anonymous audit programs to detect problematic patterns before they become critical. Clear consequences for discriminatory behavior at all levels, including executive leadership, and an independent audit committee reporting directly to the board. This is not a public relations campaign, Marcus emphasized. This is a fundamental cultural shift that includes accountability at every level, mine included. He looked at everyone at the table. I propose the implementation of this protocol as a condition for continuing my investment. If the board rejects these reforms, Kane Capital Group will divest its 42% stake within 60 days. The ultimatum was clear and devastating. Without Kane Capital's investment, Pinnacle would face an immediate financial crisis and likely bankruptcy. David Chen leaned back, considering the implications. You're not leaving us many options, Marcus. No, I'm not, Marcus confirmed, because half measures won't solve this problem. Either we commit fully to the transformation, or I cannot in good conscience continue my association with this company. Robert looked around the table, reading the room. I want a motion and a vote. First, the decommissioning of the fleet. Second, the implementation of the Kane Equality Protocol. Catherine Wells was the first to speak. I recommend approving both measures, as written, without any changes. The motion was passed unanimously. The 12 executives agreed that the alternative was corporate suicide. The motion is approved, Robert announced. Marcus, you have full authority to implement your protocol. I'm giving you complete operational control of the transition process. When the board meeting ended, Marcus stayed behind with Robert and a small team of senior executives who would manage the implementation. We need to move fast, Marcus said, pulling out a timeline. The announcement of the fleet landing will be made public within 2 hours. Security audits will begin immediately. Work on developing the training program starts today. He turned to Thomas Garrett, Vice President of Customer Experience. Thomas, I want you to gather all customer complaints from the last 3 years. Any incidents where passengers felt they were discriminated against or their safety concerns were ignored. We'll review them all. Thomas nodded, but the look on his face showed how difficult the task would be. There could be thousands of cases. Then we'll need a special team, Marcus replied. Start hiring today. He looked at Elena Rodriguez, who had been called to the head office and now sat pale and silent at the back of the room. Elena, you're suspended pending the outcome of the investigation into Flight 6. That's precisely the problem, Marcus said, without being rude. You didn't see. You operated on such normalized assumptions that you didn't realize they were biases. That's what we're going to change. He turned to the wider group. By the end of this week, I want the following implemented. An independent safety line, where any passenger can report concerns and be assured they will be followed up on. A restructured crew training program focused on equal treatment protocols. A public transparency dashboard showing our progress on these metrics, and special teams reviewing past incidents to identify patterns we've missed. Robert was frantically taking notes. Marcus, this is going to be expensive and complicated. Yes, Marcus agreed. It will also save lives and rebuild trust. The costs are justified. The complexity is necessary. When the meeting ended and the managers rushed off to their assigned tasks, Robert pulled Marcus aside. I need to ask, Robert said quietly. The anonymous audits. How long did you plan to continue before revealing your identity? Marcus considered the question. Until I saw real change or undeniable proof that change was impossible. Today I saw both. Proof of how broken the system is, and a crisis dramatic enough to force transformation. You orchestrated this, Robert said, without much accusation in his tone. No, Marcus corrected. I documented the existing problems and waited for them to surface naturally. What happened on Flight 614 wasn't orchestrated. Given the culture that was allowed to develop, it was inevitable. He paused for a moment, then added, but when it happened, I made sure there would be no possibility of hiding or downplaying it. Full documentation. Multiple witnesses, irrefutable evidence. This was deliberate. Robert shook his head slowly. What about Stephen Mitchell? Derek Pemberton? What will happen to them? Stephen will be dismissed, said Marcus. Ignoring a critical security issue is unforgivable. But I want him to participate in our training program development process. His perspective on how crew culture normalized this behavior is invaluable. What about Pemberton? Derek Pemberton is a symptom, not the cause, Marcus replied. The system taught him to expect that right to be rewarded, so he thought he had the right to demand my seat. We need to change the system, not just punish people who learn to operate within it. Over the next 48 hours, Pinnacle Airways' transformation accelerated at an unprecedented pace. News of the fleet's grounded flights made headlines worldwide, praised by safety advocates but criticized by business analysts focused solely on short-term financial impacts. But Marcus had calculated differently. In the current climate of heightened awareness around discrimination and corporate responsibility, he knew Pinnacle's transparent and comprehensive response would strengthen the brand rather than damage it. The news shifted from criticism of the flight suspensions to interest in the broader story. Billionaire CEO on secret mission exposes airline bias. A passenger's overlooked warning changed aviation safety. The 2A seat incident bias almost caused a disaster. The phrase "Don't forget seat 2A" began trending on social media, becoming an acronym that emphasized the importance of listening to substance over appearance. At Pinnacle's training facility, Marcus oversaw the development of a new crew training program. Unlike traditional corporate training, this program was designed by experts in cognitive bias, safety culture, and operational psychology. Sofia Torres, promoted to training program coordinator, led a session that Marcus observed from the back of the room. The goal here isn't to make you feel guilty, Sofia explained to the room of flight attendants. It's about understanding how normal, well-meaning people can have dangerous blind spots. Let me show you what happened on Flight 614. After showing footage of the emergency landing, passenger statements about the pre-flight conflict were displayed. The room watched in an uncomfortable silence as their colleagues' behavior was examined and analyzed. The critical error wasn't just the discrimination, Sofia continued. It was the connection between that discrimination and safety. After the crew decided Mr. Kane shouldn't be in business class, they created a mental filter. When Mr. Kane reported a safety issue, that filter prevented them from taking it seriously. An experienced flight attendant raised her hand. But we are trained to prioritize safety above all else. You are, Sofia acknowledged. But you are also human. And humans have unconscious biases that affect how we process information. What we are doing here is learning to recognize and overcome those biases. Meanwhile, maintenance crews conducted an unprecedented review of Pinnacle's entire fleet. The review uncovered 12 aircraft with documented maintenance issues that had been deferred. Had these issues been reported by passengers rather than crew, a different priority order might have been established. Similar situations to the hydraulic problem on aircraft 614 were identified on 3 aircraft. These situations were slow leaks that could become critical under the right conditions. David Chen, the maintenance chief assigned to the inspection program, summarized the findings in his report to Marcus. We found that issues reported by passengers were consistently given lower priority than those reported by crew, regardless of their technical severity. This is not a written policy, but it is ingrained in how our systems prioritize work orders. Marcus added this finding to a growing body of evidence showing how bias seeps into every level of operations, from customer service to safety protocols. A week after the incident, Marcus stood before all of Pinnacle's corporate staff. Over 2,000 employees gathered in the main hangar at O'Hare, with thousands more watching via video link. A week ago, he began, his voice carrying across the vast space. I was a passenger on Flight 614. I didn't look the way some people think business-class passengers should look. Therefore, I was told I didn't belong in the seat I had paid for. He paused for a moment, allowing the audience to digest this familiar story. When I reported a critical hydraulic leak, my concern was dismissed, not because my concern was unfounded, but because the crew decided my observations were worthless based on my appearance. The crowd was silent and attentive. I'm not telling this to embarrass anyone, Marcus continued. I'm telling it because what happened to me happens to countless passengers every day. The difference is that this time, I have the resources and position to make a difference. Pointing around the hangar, he showed several Pinnacle planes sitting on the ground. These planes are on the ground because we chose transparency and transformation over business as usual. Yes, it's expensive. Yes, it's inconvenient. But it's necessary. Marcus's voice grew more resolute. From today onward, Pinnacle Airways will operate under a new standard. Every passenger deserves equal respect, regardless of appearance or perceived status. Every safety concern deserves equal attention, regardless of who reports it. These are not wishes. These are necessities, the real consequences of violations. Kane summarized the Equality Protocol in detail: training, accountability measures, independent oversight. Then he added something unexpected. I am also announcing the establishment of the Kane Aviation Safety Foundation. We are donating $50 million to the foundation to investigate biases in safety reporting across the entire transportation industry. Because this problem isn't unique to Pinnacle, it's everywhere. The announcement reverberated through the crowd, accompanied by murmurs of surprise and approval. Finally, Marcus said, I want to introduce someone many of you saw in the news this week. Stephen Mitchell stepped onto the stage, his presence creating palpable tension among the crowd. He looked much weaker than before, his former arrogance completely gone. Stephen was the chief flight attendant on Flight 614, Marcus explained. What he did that day was wrong. He was removed from his position. However, he agreed to join our training program, not as an instructor, but as a cautionary example, and ultimately, as an advocate for change. He turned to Stephen. Tell them what you learned. Stephen stepped up to the microphone, his voice trembling. I spent 17 years in this industry and thought I provided excellent service. I took pride in catering to VIP passengers, in knowing who was important. He paused to gather his courage. What I didn't realize was that when I decided who was important, I also decided who wasn't, and that created dangerous blind spots. When Mr. Kane reported the hydraulic leak, I didn't investigate because I decided his observations weren't valuable. That decision could have cost 237 people their lives. The hangar was completely silent. The reason I'm standing here today is not because I want to, Stephen continued. Mr. Kane insisted that my experiences could help prevent others from making the same mistakes. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I will do everything in my power to ensure that what happened on Flight 614 never happens again. The reactions were mixed. Some employees nodded understandingly, while others clearly showed their discomfort. But the message was clear. Accountability and transformation could coexist. As the meeting ended, a reporter who had been granted permission to cover the event approached Marcus. "Mr. Kane," she asked, "some critics say this whole situation was fabricated for publicity. How do you respond to that?" Marcus met the woman's gaze steadily. "For 6 months, I've been conducting anonymous service audits to document problems that Pinnacle's internal systems couldn't catch. What happened on Flight 614 was not fabricated. It was the inevitable result of a broken culture. The only thing I fabricated was ensuring that this incident wasn't hidden or downplayed when it happened." "What about the financial impact?" he pressed. "Since the suspension of flights was announced, your company's stock has lost 8% of its value." "Short-term stock prices are irrelevant," Marcus replied. "We're building something sustainable. Within 12 months, Pinnacle Airways will be the industry standard for safety and equal treatment. That long-term value far outweighs temporary stock fluctuations." As the reporter walked away, Robert Harris joined Marcus and watched the employees exit the hangar. "They're scared," said Robert. "Change always creates fear." "Fear isn't the problem," said Marcus. "What nearly killed people was complacency. I'd rather have fear than complacency." 2 weeks after the incident, Pinnacle's fleet returned to service with comprehensive safety certifications and newly trained crews. The first flight to take off with the new protocols was Flight 614 from Chicago to San Francisco, on which Marcus again sat in business class. This time, however, the welcome he received was warm, professional, and identical to the experience of all other passengers. The transformation was real, visible, and just beginning. A year after the Flight 614 incident, Marcus Kane stood in the bright atrium of the newly opened Kane Aviation Safety Institute in Washington, D.C. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out onto the Potomac River, and the morning sun illuminated exhibits detailing the transformation of aviation safety culture over the past 12 months. The Institute's opening ceremony was attended by aviation industry leaders from around the world, FAA officials, security researchers, and perhaps most importantly, representatives from all major U.S. airlines that had implemented their own equality protocols following Pinnacle's public transformation. The moderator said, "Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Marcus Kane, founder of Kane Capital Group and president of the Kane Aviation Safety Institute, with a round of applause." Marcus stepped onto the podium wearing a custom-tailored suit today, but when he arrived at the building that morning, he was wearing his usual hooded sweatshirt and jeans, subtly reminding everyone of where this journey began. "A year ago," Marcus began, his voice echoing clearly through the packed hall, "I was sitting in Seat 2A on Pinnacle Airways Flight 614, and I experienced something millions of people experience regularly. Despite having every right to be there, I was judged for being somewhere I didn't belong." He clicked on the slide showing the business class cabin. That seat had become infamous. This experience alone was not extraordinary. What made it significant was the link between this prejudice and a critical safety error. When I reported the hydraulic leak before takeoff, my concern was dismissed, not because it lacked technical validity, but because the crew had already decided my observations were worthless. Most of the listeners who knew the story well still leaned forward with rapt attention. "This disregard would cost 237 lives," Marcus continued. It also revealed a more insidious truth. Bias doesn't just create uncomfortable experiences or unfair treatment, it creates deadly blind spots in safety systems. Moving to the next slide, he showed data compiled over the past year. Since implementing the Kane Equality Protocol at Pinnacle and similar programs at 43 other airlines, we've seen notable changes. The statistics were compelling. Security concern reports increased by 64% at participating airlines. 147 of these new reports identified legitimate maintenance issues requiring immediate intervention. 17 potential catastrophic failures were detected before they could occur. Customer discrimination complaints decreased by 73% across the system. Employee satisfaction scores increased across all demographic groups. "However, the numbers alone don't tell the whole story," said Marcus. "The real change is cultural." He gestured to the audience. "In this room, there are crew members who have learned to recognize their own biases. There are managers who have restructured their operations based on equality rather than status hierarchies. There are regulators who have updated guidelines to prevent bias-based filtering of safety information." Marcus paused for a moment, then shared something more personal. 25 years ago, my mother was removed from her first-class seat while traveling to her mother's funeral. The crew claimed there was a confusion with her ticket, even though she had paid full price. As other passengers watched in uncomfortable silence, my mother was taken to economy class. His voice grew quieter but more intense. My mother later told me, "Never let them make you feel like you don't belong where you deserve to be." That lesson guided me through elite university scholarship programs, Wall Street firms that assumed I was there to fill diversity quotas, and finally to that seat on Flight 614. He looked directly at the audience. This institute exists because my mother's experience was not unique then, and similar experiences are not unique today. But we are changing that. Not with guilt or shame, but by systematically restructuring our methods of valuing human worth and prioritizing knowledge. Following the keynote address, Marcus participated in a panel discussion with other aviation leaders. He was joined by Robert Harris, CEO of Pinnacle, Catherine Wells, administrator of the FAA, and Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a cognitive bias researcher who helped develop the training protocols. During the Q&A session, a reporter asked, "Mr. Kane, what would you say to critics who argue that your approach is too expensive and prioritizes social engineering over operational efficiency?" Marcus smiled slightly. "I would say they've made the wrong choice. Safety and equality aren't expenses, they're investments that reduce liability, enhance service quality, and strengthen brand trust. Pinnacle's revenue has increased by 12% annually despite the initial takeoff costs. Customer loyalty metrics have improved across every demographic group, and most importantly, we haven't lost a single aircraft or experienced a major safety incident." He leaned forward. "The real question isn't whether we have the power to address bias in aviation. It's not about whether we have the power. Every critical issue overlooked because it comes from the wrong source is a potential disaster waiting to happen." Robert Harris added, "Before the Flight 614 incident, we had normalized blind spots we weren't even aware of. Without realizing we were doing it, we were prioritizing some passengers over others. This led to inefficiencies, legal risks, and dangerous security gaps. The transformation Marcus forced us to make eliminated these problems." FAA Administrator Catherine Wells then spoke. "From a regulatory perspective, what Pinnacle demonstrated is that voluntary, comprehensive reform can be more effective than mandatory compliance. Since then, we have updated our guidance to incorporate equity protocols into safety management systems across the industry." When the panel ended, a young black woman in a pilot's uniform approached Marcus. Her wings indicated she was a first officer at a regional airline. "Mr. Kane," she said, extending her hand, "I wanted to thank you personally. I'm Sierra Mitchell, Stephen Mitchell's daughter." Marcus raised his eyebrows in surprise. Stephen never mentioned he had a daughter in aviation. "He didn't know," Sierra said. "I had applied to flight school, but hadn't told him yet. I was afraid he wouldn't take me seriously, that he'd think I was trying to use his connections or that I didn't belong in the cockpit." She paused, her emotions evident in her voice. "After what happened with Flight 614, he called me. Not just to check in quickly, but he really called. He apologized for every time he'd dismissed my goals, for every assumption he'd made about what I wanted or could achieve. And he asked if he could attend my flight school graduation." "Did he?" Marcus asked. Sierra nodded, her eyes welling up. "Front row. Seeing him there was the proudest moment of my life. Then he told me about the work he'd done with your foundation, how he'd trained the other crew members to recognize the biases they'd been unaware of for 17 years. Marcus smiled. "Your father's transformation is extraordinary. His willingness to openly admit his failures has made him one of our most effective advocates. He talks about you constantly," Sierra said, "not as the billionaire who exposed him, but as the person who gave him a chance to be a better man. You could have ruined his career and moved on, but instead you made him part of the solution," he says. "Punishment without rehabilitation only creates pain," Marcus replied. "Your father had the courage to face what he did and use that experience to help others. That's rare and valuable." As Sierra left, another familiar face approached Marcus. Derek Pemberton, the passenger who had demanded seat 2A on that fateful flight. Derek looked different. He was still well-dressed, but there was a humility that hadn't been there a year ago. Arrogance had been replaced by something close to regret. "Mr. Kane," Derek said quietly, "I know I'm the last person you want to see today, but I wanted to tell you something." Marcus motioned for him to continue. "I lost my CEO position," Derek began. 3 months after the Flight 614 incident was made public, the board removed me. They cited conduct contrary to company values, and my perceived habit of treating people below my perceived status as expendable." He paused for a moment. "At first I was furious. I blamed you for ruining my reputation. But then I started therapy, actually, as part of a court order, as part of the settlement with Pemberton Industries, and I began to understand something I'd avoided for 54 years. "What was that?" Marcus asked. It wasn't trust or success that I thought I deserved. It was a deep insecurity that I masked by demanding others validate my importance. I needed that chair, the respect, the visible signs of status, because without them, I didn't know who I was. Derek's voice dropped even lower. Therapy helped me realize that I'd spent my entire life measuring myself by how much better I was than others, rather than by my own intrinsic worth. And that mindset made me ruthless in ways I wasn't even aware of. Marcus studied him thoughtfully. "What are you doing now?" "I'm teaching," Derek replied. "I teach business ethics at a state university. I tell my students about Flight 614, how I demanded your seat, how I dismissed you as insignificant, how I threatened to use my connections to make your life difficult. Then I tell them how dearly I paid for that kind of thinking." He met Marcus's gaze directly. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that what happened that day fundamentally changed me. Instead of just wanting respect, I'm trying to be someone who contributes." Marcus extended his hand. "This is the best outcome possible, Derek. Not everyone has the courage to examine themselves so honestly." As they shook hands, a notification sounded on Marcus's phone. It was from Sofia Torres, now Vice President of Culture and Security Integration at Pinnacle. "Marcus, you need to see this. On Flight 807, a passenger reported unusual engine vibration. The crew immediately investigated and found a cracked turbine blade. The plane was grounded, preventing a potentially catastrophic failure. The passenger was a 16-year-old girl flying solo for the first time. The protocol worked." Marcus showed the message to Derek. "This is why it matters. A young passenger's observation was taken seriously because we removed the filters that would have dismissed it as the nervousness of inexperience. That's cultural change, valuing content over assumptions about its source." That evening, Marcus invited the people who had played a key role in Pinnacle's transformation to a special dinner. Stephen Mitchell, Sofia Torres, David Chen, the mechanic who verified the original hydraulic leak, and Elena Rodriguez, who completed the training program and now works in Pinnacle's Equity Compliance Department, were there. "A year ago," Marcus said, raising his glass of sparkling cider, "we were strangers brought together by crisis. Today we are colleagues united by a common purpose, a transformation that will outlive us." They drank, and then Elena spoke. "Mr. Kane, may I ask you something I've been wondering about for months?" Marcus nodded. "When you boarded Flight 614, did you know the events would escalate this way? Did you plan it?" Marcus considered his answer carefully. "I knew discrimination was a pattern at Pinnacle. I documented it on multiple flights. What I didn't know was when and how it would surface in a way that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. I certainly didn't anticipate the hydraulic failure." He paused for a moment. "But when something happened, I made sure everything was documented completely. Photos, timestamps, witnesses. Whatever it was, I made sure it couldn't be dismissed as some he said, she said misunderstanding." "So you were expecting a crisis," Stephen said, not in a particularly accusatory tone. "I was expecting this system to be undeniably exposed," Marcus corrected. "Given the evolving culture, a crisis was inevitable. I was just confident that when the crisis came, it would force real change instead of cosmetic tweaks." David Chen raised his glass. "Well, it worked. I've been in aviation maintenance for 26 years. I've never seen the kind of systematic safety improvements we've implemented in the last 12 months. The connection between equality and safety, that insight is changing the way we think about everything." 2 weeks later, Marcus boarded another Pinnacle Airways flight, this time openly accepting his identity and role. He was heading to San Francisco for Kane Capital's annual investor meeting. There, he would present Pinnacle as a case study in value-driven transformation. As he settled into his specially requested 2A seat, a young flight attendant approached him with a warm smile. "Mr. Kane, welcome aboard our flight. It is our honor to serve you today. May I offer you anything before takeoff?" Marcus glanced at her name tag. "J. Harrison, Training Class 2024B, one of the first groups trained under the new protocols." "Just water, thank you," Marcus said. "May I ask you something? How did the new training program go for you?" A thoughtful expression appeared on Jennifer Harrison's face. "To be honest, it changed my perspective on everything. We spent a lot of time learning about cognitive biases, how assumptions filter what we notice and prioritize. I thought I was already unbiased, but the training showed me blind spots I wasn't aware of." She continued in a slightly lower voice. "My instructor was Stephen Mitchell. At first it seemed strange that someone who had been fired for discrimination was teaching us. But listening to him explain how he had worked for 17 years without realizing his biases was very compelling. It took the lessons out of the theoretical realm and made them real." As Jennifer moved to help other passengers, Marcus noticed Derek Pemberton boarding a few rows behind him. They nodded to each other. It wasn't exactly friendship, but it signaled mutual acceptance of their shared history and evolution. The flight was smooth and uneventful, which was the goal. There was no drama. There was no conflict. Just professional service offered equally to every passenger, regardless of appearance or perceived status. When the plane landed in San Francisco, Marcus disembarked with everyone else, receiving no special treatment or priority. Passing through the terminal, he walked past a wall display showing Pinnacle's new advertising campaign. Everyone belongs, everyone matters, every voice is heard. Simple words, but they were backed by a systematic change that made them more than just a marketing slogan. At Kane Capital's investor meeting, Marcus introduced Pinnacle as a company at the center of their value-focused investment strategy. He told the assembled investors and analysts, "A year ago, we owned 42% of an airline with a failed culture that created service problems and security risks. Today, we own 42% of an airline that has become the industry standard for equality and security integration." He presented the financial data. Pinnacle's stock price has fully recovered and is up 8% above pre-crisis levels. Customer satisfaction scores are at an all-time high across all demographic groups. Safety incident rates have decreased by 43%. Employee engagement has significantly increased. The company has received numerous industry awards for operational excellence. An analyst raised his hand. "Mr. Kane, some critics claim you're using your position to prioritize ideology over profit, engaging in social engineering. How do you respond to that?" Marcus smiled. "I can say that the financial results speak for themselves. We didn't sacrifice profit for principles. We discovered that when principles are applied correctly, they increase profit. Companies that show equal respect to all stakeholders achieve stronger loyalty, lower legal risk, and better operational results." He moved to the next slide. "But more importantly, we prevented disasters. Security enhancements alone, eliminating bias-based filtering that caused critical issues to be overlooked, prevented at least 3 potential disasters in our airline portfolio. What's the profit calculation for preventing over 700 deaths?" The question hung in the air, unanswerable from a purely financial perspective, but devastatingly clear from a moral one. 5 years after Flight 614, Marcus returned to Pinnacle's Chicago headquarters for a different ceremony. The airline was opening a new training center and had asked him to speak at the inauguration. The facility was state-of-the-art and included simulation rooms where crew could practice recognizing and overcoming biases in realistic scenarios, safety reporting labs where passenger concerns were processed and prioritized, and a museum-like exhibit detailing Flight 614 and its aftermath. At the center of the exhibit was Seat 2A, preserved from the actual aircraft with a plaque that read, "This is where the transformation began. Never forget that honor is not negotiable and that every voice deserves to be heard." Marcus stood before an audience of newly hired interns. He commanded respect not with authority, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had fundamentally changed an industry. "Some of you," he began, "were in elementary school when Flight 614 made headlines. This story may seem like ancient history, but the lessons to be learned here are timeless." He pointed to the reserved seat behind him. "This seat represents a choice everyone in aviation makes every day. Do you judge passengers by their essence or their appearance? Do you prioritize safety concerns based on their importance or their source? Do you create inclusive systems or exclusionary hierarchies?" A young intern raised his hand. "Mr. Kane, do you think bias can be completely eliminated?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Probably not completely. Bias is part of human cognition. We have evolved to make quick decisions based on pattern recognition. However, we can recognize bias, acknowledge it, and build systems that prevent it from causing harm. That is the purpose of this training, not to eliminate bias, but to prevent it from creating dangerous blind spots." After the ceremony, a familiar face approached Marcus. Sierra Mitchell, now a captain at Pinnacle, with 4 stripes gleaming on her uniform. "Captain Mitchell," Marcus said warmly, "congratulations on your promotion." Sierra smiled. "Thank you, and thank you for speaking today. My father wanted to be here, but he's running a training session in Denver." "How is he?" "He's fine," Sierra replied. "Actually, he's doing really well. He's found a much more meaningful purpose in this job than just serving drinks and checking seatbelts. He often tells me that getting fired was the best thing that ever happened to him, because it forced him to become the person he was always meant to be." She paused for a moment, then added, "He asked me to give you something." Sierra handed Marcus a small frame. Inside was a photo of Steven standing with flight attendants of various nationalities. It was clearly a training class, and they were all wearing the same t-shirts that read, "Don't forget Seat 2A. Steven had written underneath the photo, "When I couldn't see my own potential, thank you for seeing mine. The man I am today is better than the man I used to be, and it's because you demanded better. Stephen Mitchell." Marcus examined the photo, his usually calm face, showing a flicker of emotion. "Tell your father I'm proud of him. And tell him this." He pointed to the training center. "This is his legacy. Without people willing to change, transformation doesn't happen." That evening, as the sun set over Chicago, Marcus stood at the window of his hotel room, looking out at O'Hare in the distance. That night, hundreds of flights would take off, carrying thousands of passengers to destinations around the world. On those flights, crew members would make thousands of small decisions about how to treat people, how to respond to concerns, how to assess value, and how to prioritize. And because of what happened in Seat 2A 5 years ago, those decisions would be guided by principles that prioritize substance over appearance, safety over status, and dignity over respect. Marcus's phone vibrated with the last message of the day. It was from Sofia Torres, still working late at Pinnacle's headquarters. "Marcus, the final numbers are in. 5 years of the Kane Equality Protocol, 807 critical safety issues detected early, 0 major accidents, 94% employee satisfaction, industry-leading customer loyalty. But the most important figure, 23 potential disasters prevented because someone who didn't seem important was taken seriously. That translates to over 6,100 lives saved. Thank you for not getting up from that seat." Marcus wrote a simple reply. It wasn't the seat that mattered. It was the principle. And that principle now protects millions of passengers every day. That's what matters. He put down his phone and turned back to the window, watching the bright trails of planes against the darkening sky. Somewhere, a passenger who didn't fit someone's assumptions about who should be in the premium cabin was being treated with dignity and respect. Somewhere, a crew member was investigating a safety issue based on the validity of the report, not who made it. Somewhere, culture was changing with every interaction, and all of this had begun because a hooded man refused to get up from seat 2A. Marcus smiled. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay exactly where you belong.